Good morning, everyone. So, I've been asked to come here today to speak about the coroner service, the work generally that we do, and really to try to paint a bit of a picture around road-related fatalities, motor vehicle incident fatalities in the province of British Columbia. And just to give you a general picture, I think widely, and then also just around speeding-related fatalities in general. But before I do that, I think it's important that folks in the room understand what our mandate is and what it is that we do as a generalist service in this province. So our service is committed to conducting thorough, independent examinations of the factors contributing to death in order to improve community safety and the quality of life in British Columbia. And we don't just, as a generalist service, we don't just investigate road-related fatalities. We investigate all fatalities that are reportable under the Coroners Act. In any given year, we might investigate upwards of 11,000 deaths a year. And to put that into perspective, a very small amount of those might be motor vehicle-related fatalities. So, as a service, we are a civil regulatory regime. We're not fault finders. Instead, we focus only on finding fact. We have coroners throughout the province that investigate all sorts of deaths. And our coroners are independent investigators, and their role is to clarify the circumstances in sudden, unexpected, and unnatural deaths for the public record, which means that pretty much every road-related fatality or motor vehicle-related fatality is reported to us. Even in instances where we might have an individual who suffers a natural event behind the wheel, those would typically be reported to our service. Our role is, aside from collecting data and investigating deaths and classifying deaths, is also to make recommendations to prevent future loss of life in similar circumstances. And I think as I move along in the presentation, you'll see that we've certainly tried to do that with respect to road-related fatalities. And lastly, the coroner's role is independent. So essentially, we are unfettered in our investigations. We elicit the facts as they present themselves and through our investigations. We're there to serve the deceased, we're there to serve the deceased's family, the community, and then broader societal interests. And I think as we move forward in the presentation around recommendations, that's where we can accomplish that mostly. So in terms of our service, we investigate all deaths resulting from violence, misadventure, and accidents. Those include homicides, suicides, drug overdoses, really an array of deaths that are non-natural or non-natural and non-expected. So we're mandated to answer 5 questions in the province: who died, when, where, how, and by what means they came to their death. And then our main goal is to prevent future death in, as I said earlier, similar circumstances. So in 2016, the Coroner's Service investigated approximately 10,300 deaths. Last year, we investigated over 11,000. To put that into perspective, there are around 35,000 deaths that occur in the province annually. So about 25,000 of those deaths are natural expected deaths, and a coroner would never be involved in investigating those deaths. Of the 10,300 deaths in 2016, 315 of those deaths were related to a motor vehicle incident. And as we move along, you'll see some statistics in terms of how that has actually decreased in the province over the past, really over the past 15 years. So I talked about what we try to do in our traffic investigations and our investigations in general, and that is to determine where, when, how, and by what means the individual came to their death. So coroners will visit the scenes in all of these incidents. They'll seize relevant records and documents. We will review pre-incident events. We'll work with traffic reconstruction specialists. Again, and when we move further into some of the data, that's important in terms of some of the limitations that we have as a generalist service, not being specialists in road-related fatalities, is that we are oftentimes dependent on experts in the field when we're making our final determinations. We also will order autopsy or toxicology testing when required. It is important to note that in this province, toxicology examinations are mandatory in every roadway fatality. Where possible, we also identify contributing factors into those deaths. So here's a general picture dating back to 2000 around road-related fatalities or motor vehicle incident-related deaths. And you can see that we hit our peak in 2003 at 474 deaths. But since that time, there's generally been a steady decline through to 2016, where we're at 317 deaths in the province. What you'll see later on, though, is that speeding as a contributing factor has remained relatively level throughout. So it continues to be a major issue. So when we break that down in terms of motor vehicle incident deaths by means, and if we specifically look at the last 4 or 5 years, from 2012 to 2016, you'll see that it's about 60% include drivers and passengers in personal vehicles. About 20% of those deaths are pedestrian related. 11% involve motorcycles or moped riders, and then bicyclists and drivers and passengers in commercial vehicles. Just to give you a bit of a picture before we get into talking about sort of speeding and how it contributes. Also, to give you a little bit of a picture of road-related fatalities in the province, about 2/3 of all road-related fatalities in the province involve males, and about 1/3 involve females. And if you break that down a little bit further, and by age and gender, certainly it's males and females generally between the ages of 19 and 29, and those are also associated with high-risk behaviors like impaired driving and speeding, certainly. And again, as you move through with respect to males and females, I think the second highest area is the 50 to 59 age category. For females, generally, it's remained pretty constant in terms of the level throughout, but for males, certainly it's those individuals between 19 and 29 and 50 and 59 years of age where we're seeing the highest rates of incident. So if we also break it down, and we're often asked to do this by region of the province, and we have 5 regions as an organization in the province, and coroners that are spread throughout the province. We generally separate our regions almost identically to the health authorities. And if you look at motor vehicle incident deaths by health authority, you'll note that the Interior region and the Fraser region certainly, and this is over time, I've just given you a snapshot here from 2012 to 2016, but those 2 regions account for about 60% of all the road-related fatalities in the province. And I should say that when I talk about road-related fatalities in the province, really I am focusing on those that occur on public roadways. They don't include driveways, they don't include Forest Service roads and the like. So some of the contributing factors and limitations for us as a service is that in some cases, actually in many cases, like unwitnessed motor vehicle incidents, it may not be possible to determine the specific human factors like inattention, distraction, fatigue. And one of the main areas for us as an organization in terms of impacting public policy, as you can imagine, would be to determine whether or not factors are contributory or not. And so those types of factors can be quite limiting, and we oftentimes get criticized for the lack of data that we have around specifically those 3 areas as being contributory. So human factors we always sort of approach with caution unless there's really solid factual evidence. Now, more measurable information for us are things like speed and intoxication. They're way more reliable for us, and there's way less discrepancy in terms of us as a service when coroners are out there independently gauging whether or not either of those factors are indeed contributory to an incident. And there's often more than one contributory factor in a fatality. So, for example, a speeding driver on an icy road. And that's where I think it's important to treat the data that I'm about to present with a bit of a bit guarded in terms of our coroners are independent investigators. And until very recently, over the last 3-4 years, where we've developed a protocol to standardize those investigations so that we've ensured that we're collecting similar data no matter where a death occurs in the province. You look at data from our organization pre-2013, 2014, we had very inconsistent data. And so I think that's important because ultimately it's up to the coroner to determine what's contributory and what's not contributory. And it's very likely that a coroner in one area of the province investigating a death with the same factors as a coroner in another area might put more of an emphasis on icy road conditions than speed. And so it may or may not be determined as or set out as a contributory factor. So motor vehicle incident deaths by contributory factors, just to give you a breakdown. Obviously, driver factors, which are generally speed and impairment, make up about 69% of those contributory factors in our death, which is incredibly large. Second to that are environmental factors. So environmental factors might include things like light conditions, weather, road conditions, unexpected obstacles on a roadway. And I would also say that where no factors are identified, I think it's important to note that oftentimes speed is a factor there. And I come back to the notion that Bella talked about earlier, which is what we're not accounting for is are folks driving too fast for the conditions. And so what a coroner might do is a coroner may at the end of the day attribute a contributory factor to an environmental aspect as opposed to speed. And so I would say that there's a large segment in that 17% that are certainly due to speed. So if you further break it down to contributing factors overall, you'll note that, as I spoke about earlier, driver impairment is certainly number one on our list. And I think that really the only reason for that, the only reason why it's markedly higher than speed is because we do toxicology examinations that are consistent on every driver in the province. And it's quantitatable, and we have a measure, a set measure that we gauge it against. You either are intoxicated or you're not based on that level. With respect to speed, there's other issues that come into play, as I talked about, when you just think about the 17% there in the last slide. Coroners may or may not attribute speed as a contributory factor when they're gauging it compared to the other factors that might have come into play. And this is just another representation of the previous slide, but what I think is critically important here is for us as a service, generally, what we've seen since 2012 through to 2015, and we don't have the data for 2016, unfortunately. We haven't completed all of those investigations at this time, but you'll see that speed generally is maintained right around 23 to 24%. And that's important because during that time period is right in around the time that we standardized our protocol around all motor vehicle incident-related fatalities. So speed-related motor vehicle incidents by age and sex. So you'll see here again that certainly for males and females between the ages of 19 and 29, that's where we see most of our road-related fatalities. And a significant amount, even though we weren't able to break that down, are due to speed and impairment. So those speed-related fatalities by health authority, again, just to give you a different picture, this is from 2012 to 2016. Again, you see about 60% of the deaths taking place in those two main areas of the interior and Fraser. And we believe that's a combination of a couple of things. Certainly, they're responsible for the largest number of drivers on our roadways. Also, the highway systems themselves are quite robust. What we haven't been able to do as an organization yet, and we've been meaning to do it, it certainly is a priority of ours, is to look certainly at road-related fatalities as they have occurred in those areas where we've seen speed limit increases over the last few years. I know that there are individuals that are chomping at the bit for us to do so, and we certainly intended on doing so. Unfortunately, the opioid crisis has taken over in this province and certainly taken a ton of our time and energies from a data collection and public policy perspective. So, what does all this mean for us as a coroner service? It's critically important information for us, and really our role at the end of the day, one of our main roles, is to try to impact public policy. And the best way that we can do it, and we have a mandate to do it, and we have the authority to do it under the Coroners Act, is to do so through recommendations. We generally make recommendations on one-off cases. So we might make recommendations on a case like, for instance, here in 2014, an individual driving on Highway 10 in Delta, BC, vehicle slid into the path of oncoming traffic. There was no center median or barrier in that area. It was also an area that, through the coroner's investigation, was determined to be a high incident location for injury and previous death. So we made a recommendation, the coroner made a recommendation to the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure to review road design and safety upgrades. And in that case, there was uptake. There are, unfortunately, the Coroners Act does not provide us with any teeth to the recommendations that we make. So oftentimes, we're dependent on the organization that we make it to step up and to make that change. And we, it's even though there's no teeth attached to our recommendation, certainly we get about 75 to 80% uptake. So our response ratio is incredibly solid. And oftentimes we're making those recommendations to other government entities, whether they be national or provincial. And recently, coroners, myself and the chief coroner have directed our staff to send recommendations for information to the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure for educational review for the purposes of road safety and those potential issues. Now, some other examples of just one-off recommendations that we've made since the 1990s. We've made countless recommendations that are road safety related. Most of the examples are, as you'll see here, speed limit related. Whether they be the reduction of a speed limit in an area, and I've just posted a few here, and these certainly seem to be in those areas that are highly contentious around speed zones. But also we sit on several committees, and so, for instance, the Highway 3, the Crow's Nest Highway, we were instrumental in terms of working with a larger group of stakeholders that certainly had an interest in the incidents that were occurring there. And if any of you have driven the highway in the last few years, you'll see very visible chevron signs at high impact locations, high fatality incident locations. So it's not only just about reducing speed from a speed limit perspective, but also trying to be innovative in other ways that we can alert folks to high hazard areas. So that's an example of where we've been able to affect change based on those one-off cases. But we also, as an organization, are in a very advantageous position. And the Coroners Act provides us with the authority to conduct death review panels, where we're able to collect and examine a group of incidents on the aggregate. And so very recently, we conducted a death review panel of young drivers in Canada, or in British Columbia, sorry, from 2004 to 2013. So we took a 10-year period. And I know that many of the folks in this room were likely part of that death review panel. The advantage for us to conduct death review panels is that unlike in the one-off situations where your generalist coroner, who might be investigating a homicide one day and a traffic-related fatality the next, they don't have that specific expertise. And we understand that as an organization, but we have the ability to bring in experts in the field, like you folks, to sit on our death review panels, to assist us in making informed decisions and informed recommendations to affect public policy and change. And so we've really, specifically in the last 5 years, taken this and moved forward with it. And just interestingly, this death review panel, and I'm almost done, Neil, came up with 3 recommendations. And those 3 recommendations, I'm going to focus just on the third one quickly, but the recommendations generally were to review the graduated licensing program. And if any of you have interest in what the totality of that recommendation was and the response, certainly it's public information and available to you, but I'm not going to go into that today. The second one generally was enhanced data collection by both the British Columbia Coroner's Service and ICBC around an array of different road-related issues. But most importantly for this panel was recommendation 3, which was to reduce speed-related injury and death. And that recommendation was made to the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure. And essentially, I know this is a busy slide, the recommendation itself was that the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure ensure that road safety and injury prevention are the paramount criteria used in the course of monitoring and reviewing existing speed limits and setting new speed limits on BC's provincial road system, and that the Ministry of Justice conduct a pilot project of automated speed enforcement strategies such as time and distance and speed on green in areas identified as high risk for serious crashes. Now, the response from the ministry, again, as I said earlier, just like our other recommendations, the recommendations of the panel are certainly not binding. However, the ministry certainly responded by stating that safety and injury prevention are key considerations when setting and reviewing speed limits across the province. Engineers follow internationally accepted standards when setting speed limits, which take into account a road safety history, as well as ambient speed, design, and level of adjacent development. As part of the British Columbia Road Safety Strategy Executive Steering Committee, the ministry will continue to work with its road safety partners to monitor the sections of highway where speed limits were changed, following the ministry's Rural Highway Safety and Speed Review to ensure that they remain safe. They did not really talk or respond to the issue around time and distance or speed on green, but that's something that we're going to continue to work towards. And I am going to end there. Thank you.